appear at Westminster Magistrates Court later today. Prosecutors investigating the death of a cinematographer on a movie set have said that a lead projectile has been recovered. Helena Hutchins died last week after being accidentally shot by the actor Alec Baldwin on the set of Western movie Rust in New Mexico. Director Joel Souza was also injured but is now recovering after leaving hospital. Speaking today at a news conference, Santa Fe County Sheriff said that it's too early to rule out the possibility that a crime was committed.
In reference to possible charges, it's too early right now in the investigation to comment on charges at this point. The investigation will continue, and if the Sheriff's Office determines during our investigation a crime has occurred and probable cause exists, an arrest or arrests will be made and charges will be filed.
More than 80,000 children aged between 12 and 15 have been booked in for their COVID-19 vaccinations online. Over 2.5 million letters will be sent out this week inviting parents to book a jab for their child this half-term. Vaccines have been available for this age group in schools in England since September, but since Friday, parents have been able to book jabs through the National Booking Service for local sites. A climate protester dressed in a Boris Johnson costume has set fire to a prop boat outside the COP26 venue in Glasgow. The stunt was organised by Ocean Rebellion, an offshoot of climate change activist group Extinction Rebellion, in protest of fossil fuels. Well, that's all your news for now. Let's get back to Dewbs & Co.
Joining me for the show tonight to debate all of our talking points are filmmaker Kerry Dingle, who's really cold and wants us to put the heating on. She's left a coat on. So, you know, what can I say? You know, energy costs are going up, Kerry. You know, you've got to keep your heating on. Sensible levels these days, as my viewers will appreciate, I'm sure. James Bloodworth, author, of course, and Labour Party activist Pamana Assad. Welcome to you guys tonight. You know the drill by now as well. I want to know your thoughts on all the topics that we're discussing tonight. You can get in touch with me on email, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or you can tweet me at Michelle Dewbs or at GBNews. But first, let's get straight into our top topic of the day, the budget. Got to be fair, it's been the top topic of yesterday as well, hasn't it? Given that most of it was leaked, of course, in advance. But nonetheless, Chancellor Rishi Sunak has set out a budget for what's called a new economy, apparently, after, of course, the COVID crisis. We're going to have apparently £150 billion increase in government spending. I say apparently because, of course, the devil will always be in the detail, and whether or not this is new money will be the key question. Let's take a quick listen to some of the things Rishi had to say.
Deputy Speaker, fuel duty cut, air passenger duty cut, alcohol duty cut, the biggest cut to business rates in 30 years. Growth up, jobs up, wages up. Public finances back in a better place, more investment in infrastructure, innovation and skills, a pay rise for over 2 million people and a £2 billion tax cut for the lowest paid. This budget helps with the cost of living. This budget levels up to a higher wage, higher skill, higher productivity economy. This budget builds a stronger economy for the British people, and I commend it to the House.
There you go. Well, let's get the latest from our political editor, Darren McCaffrey. He's live from Westminster. Darren, good evening to you. We just had a little bit there from Rishi Sunak. I think it's safe to say he's filled with optimism. What's your view?
Well, let's deal, I think, first of all, with the winners, or the good news in all of this. First of all, that the economy is expected to do a lot better than even the Treasury thought only a couple of months ago. It seems to be bouncing back from the pandemic quicker than anyone had thought, and we're back, I think, going to be back to pre-pandemic levels of economic activity within the next 6 months or so, and that's given Rishi Sunak a little bit more headroom, i.e. he's got a bit more money to spend in the months to come. And my word, he went on spending, didn't he, with essentially increases in all government departments when it came to lifting their budgets over the next year or so, obviously on some significant levels for health, education and transport. Clearly that was also that announcement on universal credit as well, which will help over 2 million people who rely on universal credit but are in work. And in addition to that, if you like a pint of beer, particularly if it's poured in a pub, or indeed a glass of Prosecco, well, you're likely to see the price of them fall only just a little over the coming years. But how do you pay for all this? Well, first of all, the bad news is we've still got a massive mountain of debt. Also, taxes are going to increase pretty much for everyone in the next 6 months or so, with that national insurance hike and indeed the income tax threshold changes. In addition to that, when it comes to universal credit, that uplift is removed for everyone, which is 5.5 million, of which only 2 million are going to benefit from today's announcements, which means that millions of people won't see any change at all. And in addition to that, if you're going to go on a really long-haul flight, you're going to see the price of that go up, though flying inside the UK will become a bit cheaper. But overall, it's this word inflation that the government cannot get away from, Michelle. The expectation is it could well hit 4-5% into 2022, and that essentially means all that spending increase, not all of it, but some of it's going to get eaten up by inflation. It means that the cost of living for you and I and everyone else goes up. We know energy prices, for example, are a big driver of that, but not just that. And that means for pretty much everyone up and down the country, our incomes next year are really going to be squeezed with those tax hikes, with that inflation rise. Disposable household income is expected to remain pretty stagnant, actually, not just next year, but for years and years to come. So in the end, even though this Chancellor argues it's about balancing the books, it's about investing in some key public sectors, for most of us, I don't think we're going to feel an awful lot better off, certainly into next year and maybe well beyond that.
Thanks for that, Darren. And also, as well, we have a conversation a lot at the moment about business rates, so about online versus the high street, etc. I think there was a bit of expectation that there might be something quite meaty in the budget about that topic. I would personally say I'm not sure it's delivered. What's your view?
Yeah, there was an announcement on business rates, you're right. They are essentially cutting them to a large degree to try and help out the high street. But, you know, some of the intrinsic things that are facing high street retailers, you know, simply a bit of business rate kind of tax relief is not going to make the world of difference to them, though Rishi Sunak, I think, argued it was the biggest business tax rate decline or cut for 30 years. In the end, of course, you know, Michelle, budgets, I've got winners and losers. And this was certainly a high spending one. You pointed out that figure of 150 billion. And we are going to see substantial tax increases to help pay for that. And we know the government obviously spent an awful lot of money during the pandemic. I think politically, though, for this Chancellor, he is in a very, very strange place. And there is a bit of disquiet on the Conservative backbenchers about this. This is Rishi Sunak, who today in the Commons argued that the government cannot do everything, that he was not happy when the state got over 50% of the national economy during the pandemic, that he was not happy about having to increase taxes, even though he argued it was necessary. And yet, when arguing to say he's a traditional Tory who wants to see a smaller state and fewer taxes, he's actually presiding over some of the biggest tax increases and the biggest tax burden we've seen for 70 years. And at the same time, seeing public spending that we've not seen really since the start of austerity. So he seems to be saying one thing, his ambition about where he wants to be, but in reality where we are today is this is a Conservative government that frankly doesn't feel very Conservative at all.
Darren McCaffrey, thank you very much. James Woodworth, your thoughts?
I think Rishi Sunak tried to put a very optimistic spin on this, but spin was precisely what it was, because I think the macroeconomic outlook for the next 5 years is very bleak. So the Institute for Fiscal Studies has predicted we're going to have stagnant pay for at least the next 5 years. Real terms wages will not be back to where they were in 2008 for at least another 5 years. We've got the highest tax burden since 1949. Inflation is going to be at least 3.5%. We're going to be a low growth economy over the next few years. We've come out of the pandemic this year with relatively strong growth, but the predictions going forward are not that strong. I also found there were some welcome things in the budget. So the universal credit tapering what that means is that this change with this, it means that if you're on universal credit and you work, which many people are, it makes it more worth your while to get a job, because one of the things that was happening before was sometimes people were getting a job when they'd been on universal credit, and then they found out their money was actually less than when they were working for hours. So that's a beneficial thing. But some of the other things, like the cut in passenger aviation duty, I think that's a bizarre policy to bring in 3 days before the COP26 summit, which is about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. We surely do not want to be encouraging domestic flights. And I think, they put duty up on long-haul flights, which that seems more essential than people flying around the UK when I think, it's for the environment, it's better to get a train, quite frankly.
Yeah.
I think James makes a lot of sensible points, but I don't think it's spin. I think Sunak really believes his own hype, actually. And it's like this kind of, I'm really optimistic about doing very little. And it's extraordinary that he can say at the end of his speech, which was a dire hour to listen to it all, we want less government, when this is a government that's shut the economy down. Given we are facing 5 years and stagnation, might be a 6% bounce, but you're talking about from minus figures. We should remember, in the first instance, they did this. This wasn't from on high. This wasn't the market of its own volition or market forces. The government shut the economy down. Consequently, there are whole sectors, and aviation, I disagree with you on that, James, deserves a massive boost to recover, along with hospitality and retail and the sectors that have got absolutely hammered. And I think your commentator is right on GB News. I just don't think there are winners in this budget, and I don't think we can be optimistic. In fact, we should be angry about the disingenuity calling something growth when actually COP26 and all that we've got on the agenda is anti-growth. And I think really that's the culture that we're facing, one which is have less, make do with less, be less, and that's what we've just seen in the budget.
Rishi would disagree with you, by the way. He would say about his departmental spending, and I quote, "It's the largest increase this century," according to him. And just to touch on these growth figures briefly, you're quite right. The forecasts are higher this year than expected at 6.5%. But as you've just heard there from Kerry and James, it does tail off. For example, it will go to 6%, or it's estimated to go to 6% in 2022, and then to 2.1% in 2023, 1.3% in 2024, and 1.6% in 2025. Pimana, your view?
So the thing that was interesting for me is to hear Rishi Sunak say that we're going to pre-2010 levels of spending with the new investments that he's announced. That to me means that we're going back to what the Labour government was spending when Labour was last in power. So does that mean that the last 10 years of Conservative cuts and austerity hasn't worked, and that we need investment in our local community? I think that's what basically Rishi Sunak is saying. The other thing for me is this point on inflation and the costs going up for a lot of people on their household bills. I think that the most important thing for us to understand is that people are going to struggle to pay their bills and to put food on the table for their families. And with these tax rises that are going to be announced and cuts for tax for businesses, I think the question for me is, whose side is the Chancellor on, local people or big business?
Well, he even called himself today the government of the public services. The public sector, I think, was one of the quotes that he used. On inflation, by the way, the Bank of England estimated that it would hit 4% inflation by the end of this year, whereas today, according to Rishi, we're looking at 4% average over the next year, so a bit of a difference there. I found some of the things quite interesting, I've got to say. One of the new aspects that wasn't leaked, I mean, pretty much everything was leaked, and you can have your own view on that, but when it comes to schools, for example, there was some interesting aspects there. So there's going to be a triple investment to create 30,000 special school places. That will really mean something to a lot of parents there. And I was also quite interested on the skills aspect. There's going to be a new UK-wide numeracy service called Multiply. They want to help 500,000 adults improve their numeracy. And also, you know, libraries, Kerry. Libraries have always become this kind of measure. Libraries and youth clubs are often the kind of community measure of how invested in an area a government really is. And there was bits on both of those aspects today. Commitments to more youth clubs, and libraries apparently will be renovated, restored and revived. Does that reassure you?
No, not at all. I mean, all of those things are positive, Michelle, but we're talking tinkering here. I mean, it's really low-level tinkering. You know, we probably need 3 times that amount in terms of special school provision, for example. You know, libraries have become largely defunct unless they've got levels of technology in them for most young people, for example, and are grotty and not exciting places to go a lot of the time. So I think it's tinkering. And I think we have to be honest and recognise you can't have what they want in terms of a high-wage economy unless you have growth, which means raising productivity, which means massive investment. In what? There is no talk of where there's a bit on R&D.
I was just about to say R&D gets a mention.
Yeah, it gets a mention. But it isn't transformative. You don't feel like you feel like this is a status quo government that's holding the line, stability, don't blame us for the crap we've caused, rather than any vision. I would like to see some vision. I think the potential for growth exists if you have a really bold plan of investment.
Give me an example.
Well, even if they were to tell us we're going to do this investment in aviation, this investment in engineering, this investment in pharmaceuticals. I'm not an economist, but I don't think you need a PhD in economics to see that you can't get to high wages and people being better off if you don't produce more.
Pamana, what's your view? Because obviously people, Labour, etc., have been very quick to be critical of a lot of this. What do you think he should have done better then?
I think the focus should have been on jobs and skills for young people. I think what we could have seen is some focus on, you know, reskilling people in the workforce towards things like, green jobs. If we want to help the environment after we've come out of COVID, we could be investing in skills towards greener jobs, not only just to help the environment, but to help the skills for the future.
Well, when you say about skills, the government have actually said that they're going to invest an increase of 42% when it comes to skills and training. So they would argue that they have thought about that and that they have covered that.
But I think the devil is in the detail, and what does that exactly mean, and where is that going to be concentrated? Is it going to be just in London, or is it going to be outside London and for the rest of the country in places that have been severely impacted by COVID-19?
What do you think? Because I think it's very easy to criticise a government. And of course, the devil is in the detail. But I think that a lot of people would be, pleased with some of the measures that have been announced today.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, it's how you pay for it. Because, I mean, we all recognise, I think, most of us recognise that taxes do need to increase somewhere to pay for the huge coronavirus debt, to clear the backlog of operations in the NHS, to clear the backlog in the justice system. Thing is, where do we raise the money from? And there's now the highest tax kind of burden on working people since 1949, and because he's raising it with national insurance.
Whilst you're talking, this is very interesting. I've actually got a graphic that I'm just going to put on the screen, because I do think this is a very interesting conversation about how things are paid for. So this is the current receipts. So you'll see that the public sector current receipts, 795 billion, and you will see there that largely they're coming from places like income tax and national insurance. So I'm sorry to interrupt you, but I think that it's just relevant to see how they're currently making their money, so to speak.
Yeah, but this is the thing. I mean, I don't think it's a good idea to put up national insurance, because that hits working people at a time when energy prices are going up, when inflation is going up, when wages are stagnating. I think there are much more creative ways to raise the money. So, I mean, reform of the council tax system, for example, taxes on property. I mean, the idea of just going on income tax. The wealthiest people in the country today it isn't through income that they're making their money, it's generated through assets. So we need to start looking at the tax system through that lens.
So you want to tax wealth, capital growth, rather than income?
I think that would be a good starting point. I mean, Rachel Reeves mentioned taxing Amazon, for example, and companies like that.
That's what I was going to mention.
Because that would help the high street as well.
Yeah, exactly. Taxing companies that don't pay fair tax in this country, like Google. There are bigger companies that don't pay their fair share of tax, which would help get that investment money that we need.
Yeah, and that's the point I was trying to raise to Darren briefly as well. I was surprised that there wasn't a more aggressive position, I suppose, in terms of business rates, because what they did say there, they was doing a 50% cut for about a year, but only for certain aspects, so only for hospitality, retail and leisure. So I know a lot of businesses will be unhappy about that. You guys have been getting in touch as well. George says it's all very well pulling the budget apart and talking about tax rises, but how else are we and the taxpayers going to pay for COVID? He says, for goodness sakes, get a grip, you lot, and stop just criticising for criticising's sake. There you go, that's what George thinks. Ruth says the government had no other option but then to shut down the economy during the pandemic. She says Labour would have annihilated the economy permanently. Everyone needs to stop whinging and expecting everything for nothing, says Ruth. And someone else on Twitter says, sadly, the budget has failed to look after ordinary workers and protect them from rising fuel hikes, energy hikes and national insurance hikes. It goes on, council tax hikes. He says it's all very disappointing and will come at a price. Well, do carry on getting in touch and let me know your thoughts. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we'll be looking at the NHS track and trace. You remember that whole pingdemic mistake? I certainly think it was a mistake, but I want to know your thoughts. Was all this a success, or do you think, as I do, it was just an expensive failure? We'll have that and more after the break.
Coming up at 8, the eyes and the ears have it. Insulate Britain protesters get an eyeful of ink and a blast from the bagpipes from furious motorists. Also explosive art. The British Gallery facing calls to withdraw an exhibition featuring suicide vests. And agoraphobia. What is the condition that stopped Rishi Sunak's right-hand man taking to the steps of number 11? That's all from 8.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christies.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, called To The Point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
Hello there, welcome back. Now, the NHS Track and Trace app has been called an eye-wateringly expensive failure in a report by MPs. The app cost 37 billion, I'll say that again, £37 billion worth of your money, taxpayers' money, and was found to be ineffective at stopping the spread of COVID-19 and preventing lockdowns. Track and trace workers, by the way, some of them at least, were paid around £1,000 a day. I'm going to say that again, £1,000 per day. Some of these people were paid. And at times, as few as 11% of contact testing staff were being used. What do you think to this? I'm fascinated to hear your views. I suspect I know what lots of them might be, but you never know. gbviews@gbnews.uk. You can email in there or Twitter @MichelleDewbs. Pamana, what's your thoughts?
So I think this was an imperfect plan that came as a response to COVID-19, and it wasn't clear whether this was going to be a short-term or a long-term initiative. I think it could have been utilised better. We could have had track and trace workers working on things that would have been supportive to the NHS, not only short-term but long-term. I'm not surprised that it's been a waste of money. I think the government could have utilised it better and spoken about it more. We could have had our politicians being role models on how best to use this app for people going into venues or various other things. but I'm not surprised that we've wasted all this money on an app that hasn't worked.
Do you use it, James?
I have used it, but not for a long time. I mean, I think the whole thing is quite farcical. I mean, I think it's also another negative story about outsourcing, because this was something that was outsourced to private consultants. They were actually paid on average $1,100 a day. That was the average that these consultants were paid. There seemed to be, there was stories going around about friends of members of the government being given some of these contracts. And the actual technology itself, I mean, I think there was support for this at the beginning of the pandemic when there were the big waves of COVID last winter. But also the stories you heard when there weren't a lot of cases around and people are getting pinged from because there's a case next door through the wall or something. I went on a flight and then someone apparently in the terminal had COVID the day before, and so everyone on the flight gets pinged to self-isolate for 10 days. It's just, it wasn't realistic, and I think people then just started to ignore it.
Well, I think they actually uninstalled it in a lot of cases. What do you think, Kerry?
I think it was ludicrous, the whole scheme, punitive and based on incredible level of distrust of the public. You know, let's face it, the testing we needed earlier on didn't start. You know, other countries, South Korea, testing was all happening. We didn't have that testing followed by sensible advice to isolate, to quarantine, with the kind of financial support if you did have to quarantine. Loads of people I know didn't install the app. Why? Because if you got pinged, you couldn't go to work on a construction site or somewhere else, and you couldn't get furlough, and you couldn't get any financial support, so you were royally screwed. I think it was a wholly punitive, ludicrous, ridiculous scheme that was bound to fail, has failed, and the government should be answerable for it.
Well, hang on there. So, you know, we're in a situation where, you know, it's all well and good to sit here now and look back and kind of say, yes, it was ludicrous, it was this, it was that. But if you look at the start of this situation, COVID was a very unknown thing. You know, it was snowballing, it was getting a lot of momentum, and the government had to do something. This was all very new. So I guess they would push back and say, well, hold on a second. Yes, of course, in the benefit of hindsight, we could have perhaps done things differently. But I'm sure that they would say that they did the best that they could at the time with the information they had available, Kerry.
Well, of course they'll say they did the best. You know, not they're going to say, oh, hands up, yeah, we're idiots paying over 2,000 consultants $1,100 a day. They're not going to admit that. But the point is, there were examples of things happening at the time. South Korea did have the testing. We didn't. Why didn't we? And it's not like a lot of us suddenly just argue this now. A lot of the public can see what was going on throughout. And the first response of the government is to develop an app. And you just know this is huge money going into some ridiculous gimmick, effectively. And then the ping fest at the end, what that did to education. Kids I know, one kid gets pinged, whole year gets sent home. I mean, appalling. So I don't think we should say, oh, well, they had to do something. They did do things. There were alternatives. They went for ludicrous schemes, lockdown, shut the economy and distrust the public because we're all spreaders and young people will kill their grannies. not good or necessary.
Well, Alison's been in touch on the emails saying, hold on, test and trace, as she calls it, is not to blame. It was the people who chose not to comply with it, which caused a lot of the problems. That's according to her. And of course, just to remind you of the extent of this, going back into July this year, 600,000 people were ordered to self-isolate by this app. I mean, 600,000 people. The impact of what, of course, that used to have on things like businesses, supply chains, etc. It was insane. And as I say, that a lot of people responded to that by uninstalling the app. But Pamana, I mean, when it comes to the public sector and it comes to IT rollouts, you know, they do have quite a dire track record. I know that there is more to this than just the IT element, but every time I see a complex, or not even that complex actually, an IT rollout in the public sector, I think about it. Maybe this is my background. My background is digital transformation, so maybe I'm a little bit more interested in this than perhaps others might be. But I look at it and think, well, how can you catastrophically get it so wrong time after time after time?
Well, I think going back to James's point, you know, this was contracted out to a private firm, and so the question really has to be to that private firm of why their IT wasn't good enough to run the system. The question I have is, you know, I had COVID last year in November, and I had track and trace workers calling me every day, and I spoke to a different person every single day of my isolation period, and one of them didn't know that I had spoken to the other. In the morning and the evening, and so their system did not work for themselves. And so the question I have is, why wasn't someone fixing that as they were going along? That's what they should have done. With a private firm, they should have had the investment ready to be able to do that.
But why is that
problem going forward?
What does it matter if it's public or private rollout?
The cost,
yes, but the point is, Paymana, you weren't to be trusted.
Yeah.
You had COVID. You went home like the vast majority of people with symptoms. You know, the vast majority, 99% of the public are not evil spreaders who want to kill elderly relatives. We could quite easily go home on the basis of a test that was positive for COVID. You know, where is this will to spread that it didn't exist?
But some people didn't
go home. So you were
called
every day
but
by
some people didn't go home though, Kerry, because I had a neighbour who had COVID and came to my front door. So some people didn't go home. That's why we needed the system in place to try and keep people safe.
Oh, and police and everything else on top, I suppose.
It wasn't
They're a minority, Paymana, let's face it. It wasn't a tiny minority of people who would be reckless. I don't accept that the vast majority, and I'm sure GBNews don't see themselves as reckless spreaders.
Well, it depends if you're getting paid to stay home, because I guess if someone says you sit at home for 10, 14 days or whatever it was, and by the way, here's X amount of money, and it's comparative to what you would say, like, I don't know, if you're a self-employed plumber or whatever, you know, if you lose your earnings for that 10 to 14 days, then that is going to dictate, I would suggest, whether or not you're going to stay at home. If the financial support was there, you probably would. Yeah. If it wasn't, you probably wouldn't.
That's almost not a question of the technology. I mean, the government took a long time to put effective enough sickness pay in for people so that they would actually stay at home and self-isolate. I mean, that was the TUC, for example, were calling that for ages last year, because what was happening was people couldn't afford to stay at home. So
that's why they were going out.
Yeah,
exactly.
So it wasn't the technology, it's just that they could not afford to stay at home, and the government took so long to put sufficient sick pay in place.
But Michelle is right. We've seen every single one of these ID schemes, you know, type schemes and apps has been an absolute disaster. And I think, I don't think that's good. I know you're interested in digital transformation. Michelle, maybe you need to take this on.
Yeah, I'll do it. £1,100 a day. Yeah, and I've got some mates, and they'll probably get involved with it as well. But also, on this whole topic, you know, you just mentioned when we talk about the budget, Kerry, you know, you're saying about they locked down the economy, they caused this, they've caused these problems. But then the whole conversation now, and I'm moving on slightly but related, the whole conversation now, there's a large conversation now about Plan B and whether or not we should look at mandating various different measures, whether it's mass mandates, whether it's COVID, vaccination certificates, and the cost that has been applied to that, or estimated to be at that, I think we covered this yesterday, is about £18 billion. So there's still this conversation about whether or not we should look to more restrictive measures going forward. I know you've got some views on this, haven't you, Pamana?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't care what your views are on vaccines or lockdowns. I think everyone wants to spend time with their family and friends over Christmas. And so if 5 minutes of mask wearing on the tube will get us there, or a 2-minute lateral flow test, just do it so that we can all all have a normal Christmas with our family and friends. And that's my view on the Plan B measures.
Yeah, but I just feel a little bit, I'm a bit cynical about some of this stuff. I'm quite opposed to Plan B. And I think this is something that absolutely splits opinion, and I think it's a very valid debate to have, because I'm not right and you're wrong. It's just different opinions. I'm very opposed to it. I don't agree with mandates, or whether it's masks or vaccines or anything. And I certainly don't agree with locking down the economy again, if that was to be a suggestion. What's your thoughts, Kerry?
I think I'm with you 100% on this. I think Plan B is awful. And again, it's this idea that we cannot act as autonomous citizens. We can't make wise decisions. We have to be mandated to do this. We have to have our behaviour, nudged and controlled, and laws made about what we can and can't do. I think if people want to wear a mask, they'll wear a mask. If people are a bit nervous, they'll socially distance. I don't think those things are transformative of the spread of the Delta variant, as we've seen that. Lots of people I know who've been hardly anywhere, who've been double jabbed, have got it, very mild, in fact, because I think the vaccine rollout's been fantastic. But I just think this Plan B it's back covering.
Well, someone calling themselves Silver Strivers, who's watching this at the moment on Twitter, says, blame, blame, blame. Hindsight is a wonderful thing. They say that they wouldn't trust the guest on the show to come up with a credible plan at the time. I think they mean you, Kerry.
I think they mean me.
Yeah, there you go. James says, give him £1,000 a day and he would. Callum's got in touch on the Twitter saying he's a former contact tracer here. He says he can confirm at times there were hours that would go by without a single thing to do. He says, don't blame the government though, blame the task management. Interesting. Someone else has been in touch, Gary, saying it's all about negativity. Fed up with everything being so negative, he says. No wonder people are depressed in society. Well, there you go.
I'm causing it.
Yeah, it's Kerry's fault. I'll kick her off. She can take. Well, I was going to say she can get a coat, but she's already got a coat.
I've got my coat on,
thanks. She hasn't even taken it off. Although, to be fair,
so tight here, they won't even put the heating on.
It's got a bit warmer now.
Yeah, I was about to say, to be fair, we've listened and we've put the heating up a notch. Anyway, coming up, we're going to take a quick break. Coming up, net zero. What do you think to net zero? It's the talk of the town, isn't it? All the time. Everything seems to be about reducing, well, not reducing, but trying to help reduce emissions, all with a view of net zero. But we've never really been consulted on this, have we? Do you think there should be a referendum before the next general election on this topic? Let me know your thoughts. We'll take a quick break and we'll be back soon.
On Tonight Live, it's me, Mark Dolan, in for Dan Wootton, reacting to Rishi Sunak's budget. What does it mean for you? My big question guest is Edwina Currie, who served under Margaret Thatcher in the 1980s. Football manager Joey Barton is in hot water over the wrong choice of words. And will Alec Baldwin ever make a movie again? And in my monologue, it's time for the Chancellor to get serious about balancing Britain's books. See you at...
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Join us for Political Correction. We're here every Sunday to correct politics and put you, the people, back in charge.
We talk about all areas of the United Kingdom, including Northern Ireland.
Our debate goes way beyond the Westminster Village. It's about the real country. It's about your opinion. So please, we want you to tell us what you think.
This is Political Correction.
Every Sunday morning from 10 a.m. here on GB News.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News, for To the Point.
Hello there, welcome back. Now, we're going to be talking about climate change in a sec, but we've just been having a little bit of a conversation in the break, which had me very interested. Lots of you are writing and going, Dewbs, why is your panel so left-wing? And lots more besides. Now, I'll tell you, one of the things that I want to do on this show is as wonderful as my opinion is in my own mind, I don't just want it to be an echo chamber of what I think. I think it's very important. Lots of the topics that are going on in society at the moment, they're quite complicated. Lots of them are very nuanced. And I think it's important that we have different perspectives, that we have respectful debate and differing opinions, as opposed to, for example, just being my opinion or those opinions that are like mine. And also, Pamana, what you was just saying is that within your party, so within the Labour Party, you would be regarded by many as being right-wing.
Yeah. And I agree with you, Michelle. I think it's really important that we have debate and we have different voices coming together to try and find a way forward for our country, because everyone wants the best, but we just have different ideas of how to get there.
Yeah, and you guys were just saying as well that the traditional left and right, it seems to be moving away from that somewhat, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, it exists in the same way anymore, I don't think. So, I mean, I'm to the left on lots of economic issues, but then other people, I often get accused by the left of being right-wing on like social issues on some things. So, I mean, no, I don't think it exists in the same way anymore. It's a bit of a outdated. It's a bit outdated.
I don't think left and right exist in the same old way. I think what happens is that people don't like what you say. Yeah. They'll call you left or right wing. Yeah. They'll say, "Oh, how left? Oh, you're being really left wing on the panel tonight." Well, I profoundly disagree with environmentalism. Full stop.
We're going to come on to that.
I know, and so people would call me really right wing. But some of your viewers assume because I'm anti-lockdown, think track and trace was a disgrace, that I must be rabid left wing. I don't think those labels mean anything, actually. I'd rather know what you actually think about the issue. That's what's important.
Yeah, and also, we don't need to dislike each other. Exactly. I've got to say,
well, we can.
I mean, Kerry, she's a bit of a one. But no, we don't need to. Just because we disagree with each other, we don't need to take that then to the level of disliking each other. That's what I think anyway. I would like to have different opinions on the show, and long may that continue. And that includes yours as well. So get in touch with me and do let me know your views. Sorry for that little spontaneous little debate there, because I'm supposed to be talking about climate change, and so I will, because the British public are apparently in favour of a referendum on the government's net zero proposals. You can't see what Kerry's doing. She's sitting there going, yes, that's what she's doing. A new poll has shown that 42% of adults said that they would support a vote on the plan, while 30% opposed it, and 28% basically didn't declare a preference. What do you think to this? I mean, I say, what do you think? I've just seen what you've been doing. Yeah. But anyway, nonetheless,
a referendum. It'd be so exciting, Brexit Mark II, just a serious debate on this, because, you know, there isn't the serious debate, and there wasn't even in the Houses of Parliament when the whole thing was announced either. And I think, you know, if nothing else, we should look critically at what does this whole net zero thing really mean. You know, if it was even effective, it would only change world emissions by 1%, and all sorts of things can go wrong in the run up to that. And this is not, I'll be clear, because I think climate change is not a problem. Climate change is a problem, but it is not an emergency. We are not facing a climate apocalypse, and the whole obsession with net zero and our emissions fails to deal with what we do need to do, which is adapt. So we have sewage in our rivers because we have a ridiculously Victorian, you know, infrastructure when it comes to water or rainfall. Germany has cataclysmic floods. can't blame it all on climate change, and so on and so forth. You know, lots of things that we need to do. The developing world needs to have an industrial revolution and catch up, not cut back. I think a really big debate about this and where we're heading would be great. And I think people like me wouldn't win. But so what? At least we'd be clear and have a discussion about it, which would be a massive step forward. And I know I've spoken to Paymana and James, so I'll drop them in it. I know they don't agree with the idea of a referendum. Well, they said earlier they didn't. And I think that's because they don't trust the public.
Do you trust the public?
No, I mean, I'm not a professional politician. I elect a representative to mull over some of these issues and examine some of these issues in detail, because I work another job and I don't have time to do it. So, I mean, we live in a representative democracy, and why we elect these people is because they're professional politicians, so they can go and study these issues and then vote on it. I mean, it's not that you don't trust people, it's that I don't think the average person working a 9-to-5 job has the time every night to read a 300-page policy paper on this. And I think the referendum idea, I mean, we live in a representative democracy, we don't live in Switzerland. I think that's a good thing. And I don't think we should spend all this money on another referendum and prise open all these new divisions. And it was also in the Conservative manifesto in 2019, the net zero target. So people have voted on it already.
Yeah, and just to reference that Swiss point that James mentioned there, in Switzerland, they actually did have a referendum on this very issue about whether or not they wanted their government to kind of head in this direction. The outcome of that, 51% voted against it and 49% in favour of it. So that one, I think it was quite a shock, actually, to a lot of people in that country that it didn't pass. Paymana, your thoughts?
So I'm against having a referendum on this issue on the basis that we saw how divisive the Brexit referendum was. What I'm worried about is the fact that in the Brexit referendum, we saw people coming up with infactual misinformation to swing either way. And I think that's going to be the same thing that will happen, and it will be repeated again with this referendum. I think climate change is something we cannot deny. The issue that worries me is migration due to climate change and the heating of the globe. If we don't want migrants to come to the UK, then we need to make sure that we tackle climate change in the global south, so we don't get people leaving their homes and their livelihoods just because of some floods and just because it's inhabitable to live where they're living.
Yeah, but I guess people watching this, you know, and I always have a little bit of a suspicion, I do, when it comes to climate change, because you read all these polls, or we get all these polls where it says, oh yeah, X%, massive majority in favour of climate change, and all of, not in favour of climate change, so in favour of climate change policies to reduce climate change. And I sit there and I think, because that doesn't align with a lot of the conversations that I have, and I have a lot of conversations, a lot of you get in contact with me. And I wonder, I've always had this suspicion when it comes to polling, whether people actually tell the truth on polls, or whether when someone stands in front of you and goes, do you care about climate change? Very few people are going to go, yeah, not really, no. They're going to go, yeah, I do, yeah, it's massive on my agenda, because they want to be perceived as a good person, so they answer in the way that they feel that they should. That is my theory on some of these things. And by the way, the reason that you mentioned about you know, in terms of this whole policy, it's us that's going to have to pay for this. We keep hearing about heat pumps. We keep hearing about, you know, if you've got an older car, you're going to have to upgrade it, etc. People, you know, we talk about the cost of living going up. People don't have a huge amount of disposable income to try and use that disposable income to kind of ward off climate change. And by the way, UK emissions are around 1% of global emissions. And when you look at some of the other countries, I think if you take the top five other countries, which are Japan, Russia, India, US and China, those five account for almost 60% of global emissions. So it's all well and good trying to dip into the member of public's purse here to get them to pay for heat pumps. But actually, if people like China and Japan and all the rest of it are not going to pull their weight, then it's not going to make that much of a difference. Anyway, a couple of people are messaging in saying that they completely agree with you, Kerry, on this.
Well, that's rare. But can I just come in and say that...
your mum and your dad, I think.
No, they totally disagree with me on this. It's not even a conversation we're allowed to have anymore. Such is the level of disagreement. I mean, I have young people coming to me and saying, Kerry, why is it you're so concerned about human beings?
What?
Yeah, I'm serious. That's how far this obsession with climate change has gone. they are more concerned about the planet, some abstract thing, than human life.
Well, Joanna Lumley, remember her? She's a great actress. She's come up with an idea to solve a lot of this climate stuff. Basically, wartime rations.
Oh, yeah.
That's what she
exactly.
reckons. She says that you could basically have points, and you get these points, and then you can spend them on whatever, but you've only got a limited amount of rationed points. What do you think to that, James?
That's a terrible idea. I mean, this is the thing. Like, this is the side of like the green politics I don't like. There's rich people who've always wanted to ration the poor, and they've jumped on the bandwagon. They've jumped on. I'm fully supportive of green energy and whatever, but no, we're not rationing people.
Right, anyway, we're almost out of time, but there was another story that I was going to cover. I don't have time, but I'll ask you just for a one-word answer. It's all about happiness, and apparently we get happier as we get older. Kerry, yes or no, do you think that's true? Are you happier now than what you were when you was younger?
Angrier and happier.
Are you?
Always.
James, are you happier now than what you once were?
I'm more contented, I guess.
What do you think?
No, because we take on more responsibilities as we get older.
Oh, interesting. But we
You're not old.
Yeah, but we also
But I
care
consider
less.
myself old.
You consider yourself old?
Well, come on now. I'm getting into my 30s, so...
Oh, my goodness me. Viewers,
We girl.
you just hear that. She's just said she's going into her 30s and
I'm in my
therefore
60s.
she considers herself old. You will look back. I promise you will look back in about, I don't know, 10 years or so, and you'll remember that time when you sat on national television and you said to the viewing public, "I'm getting old because I'm old.
It's one of my biggest fears in life. You know that.
What?
Getting old? Yeah.
Well,
Yeah, I think it's everyone's.
But the alternate to getting old is not being here. And there's a really lovely quote that I will end my show on as a nice little a note to think about. That the alternative to getting old, obviously, is not being here, and ageing is a privilege denied to many. Did you like that? Ageing is a privilege denied to many. That is my words of wisdom on this show. That's pretty much all we've got time for. Kerry, James, Pamana, thank you very much for your company tonight. Thank you as well, of course, at home for yours. Always like listening to your feedback, always like your views, even if you disagree with us, whether it's me or the rest of the panel, all views are valid on Dewbs and Co. Anyway, I'm off. I shall be back tomorrow, 6 o'clock until 7 o'clock. You have yourself a very good evening. Nigel Farage will be here at the top of the hour. I'll see you tomorrow.
Hello again. More wet weather, I'm afraid, in some parts of the UK, with the risk of flooding for parts of northern England and southern Scotland. Very mild across the board, with this southwesterly wind bringing subtropical humidity and a lot of moisture. And that moisture is being dumped across the hills of southern Scotland and northwest England as this weather front stalls through the next 24 hours. So more wet weather on the way, on top of what we've already seen through the last 12 to 24 hours. And in some parts of southern Scotland and Cumbria, more than 100 millimetres of rainfall expected by the end of Thursday, leading to a serious risk of flooding in these areas. Elsewhere, drier, but very mild still, with this strong southwesterly wind. Some showers into the northwest of Scotland, as well as Northern Ireland as we start off the day on Thursday. Drier to the southeast, with some sunny spells coming through, but the rain continues for southern and increasingly eastern Scotland, also for northern England, Wales, and increasingly the southwest through Thursday afternoon, that wet weather pushing in. Another mild day to come, nevertheless, and later Thursday, the focus for the heaviest rain increasingly across Wales and the southwest, particularly over the higher ground where, again, there could be some disruption and some localised flooding by the